President Biden is requesting an ambitious budget from Congress, boosting government spending to its highest level in decades. The budget would cost $6 trillion. Much of it comes from programs we already know about, like Mr. Biden's American Jobs and Families plans. The agenda would include major investments in climate change, infrastructure, education, and health care. All federal spending must, of course, be approved by Congress. Democrats do have full control, but the margins are thin. I want to bring in Maya MacGuineas now. She's the president of the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. It's a group that advocates to reduce the national debt. Maya, welcome. Great to have you with us. So what is your initial reaction to this proposed budget?
Right. So what we've seen so far is a budget that's actually been released in pieces, where we've seen all the big initiatives on infrastructure, on human capital investments. And now we're just about to see the entire picture when they release this budget. And unfortunately, the pieces that have not been gotten as much attention are that not only is this a very large expansion of government and very expensive, and despite the important marker that the administration has put out that they want to pay for all those new initiatives, this is still a budget that is going to have growing deficits and growing debt over the decade. And that is a result of the fact that there was a lot of borrowing already on the books. And since this new plan won't be paid for in its entirety, they're actually adding to that borrowing by more than $1 trillion. So it's expensive. It depends on a lot of borrowing. And there's still more things that really need to be done if we want this budget to turn from ambitious to ambitious and fiscally responsible.
So, Maya, in the past, we have seen deficits rise significantly under Republican presidents because of things like tax cuts for the wealthy and increases to defense spending. President Biden has been trying to make the case that it's important to spend big on everyday Americans. Is the spending that he's proposing a smarter financial investment?
Well, this is where it boils down to different people and different political parties have different preferences. In general, Republicans would prefer tax cuts and more spending on defense. But this last administration, frankly, they increased spending on every single part of the budget. So it was tax cuts, big spending, big deficits. And in general, Democrats would be more favorable of these kinds of investments and targeting towards people more in need. Different priorities, there absolutely is no right or wrong. What is right is offsetting the cost of these new initiatives, with an important exception. When you're in a global pandemic or a recession like we just were, borrowing makes a lot of sense, and borrowing we did. But so the president's new initiatives are very large, like much larger than we've seen in decades. But again, to his credit, he talks about the importance of paying for them. Now, we'll see how much of those offsets actually stay in place, because there'll be a lot of political resistance. But he definitely gets high marks for saying on these new initiatives, we want to pay for them. That is something we didn't see in the past administration, and it led to a massive increase in the national debt. And I'm hopeful, and it's really important, that we don't do that same mistake again.
So I want to delve in a little bit more into the relationship between the budget and the national debt. Economists have long believed that debt outpacing the size of the economy would send the country into a financial crisis. But we did see U.S. debt outpace it last year. Interest rates remain at historic lows, and there has been no such crisis yet. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen told lawmakers yesterday the president's budget was fiscally responsible. So do economists perhaps need to revise that long-held belief about the debt to GDP ratio?
I don't think so. I think the basic principle of that you just can't possibly have a debt that is growing faster than your economy indefinitely it's basically a truism. And there's all sorts of wishful thinking out there where people are always claim that whatever it is they like will pay for itself. And that is not the case. What is true is that the effects of the deficit and the debt are actually very difficult to see. So because we've been borrowing so much in the past, our standard of living is probably much lower today than it otherwise would have been if we had borrowed less and, frankly, invested more. So much of our borrowing in our federal budget in the past has been for consumption. So it has it weakens the economy, both where we are today and going forward. we're more vulnerable to growth in interest rates. It could put pressure on our currency. But I think one of the biggest concerns about the fiscal situation these days is how vulnerable it leaves us to all of the different global threats that are out there, whether it's cybersecurity or changing in the workforce due to technology, disruptions that we have here at home, economic competition with other countries. You don't want to be over indebted when you're dealing with these challenges. So I think it's really about having a smart policy to keep you from being so vulnerable. But instead, we seem to be taking as risky a bet that interest rates will stay low and that we can borrow indefinitely as we can. And it's not wise, and I'm afraid that we'll continue to pay a price, in many ways an invisible one, but one that nonetheless that really weakens our economy and our country.
Maya MacGuineas, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your insight.
Thank you.